webinar on how will data innovation impact you. My name is Brian Tan. I'm an SES member and a partner with a law firm in Singapore called Tinson Masons. This webinar is organized under the SES Digital Transformation Series, which SES will curate events for its members with our partnering organizations or non-tech organizations, which are the ACCA, the IBF, the SAL, Singapore Academy of Law, and SMF, Singapore Manufacturers Federation. This particular session is jointly organized with the ACCA. This particular topic is one that is quite close to my heart. It's on data and innovating with data. And so we have a whole array of speakers from various organizations. I will introduce them in detail later on, but they are Ms. Lee Chin In from the IMDA, Ms. Sherry Low from Great Eastern Life, Raju Chalam, who is a fellow at SES, Jeffrey Lim, who is a director at Joyce A. Tan and Partners, and Jeffrey and Raju will be joining us on the panel together with Mr. Lim Zichen from Nomura Asia. Before we go on further, just a couple of housekeeping rules. If you are attending this Zoom webinar and you have questions, please use the chat function to post any questions that you might have. Sorry, the Q&A function. There are two opportunities for you to do so. The first is after all the speakers have made their presentation, we will have a short Q&A session of 10 minutes. And then we'll have a short break after that, around 5:25, hopefully, followed by an hour for panel discussion, where we have 3 panelists and I will moderate that session. You can then also pose questions to the panelists on the wider issues concerning data sharing at that point in time. So do keep your questions coming. Obviously, if with the Q&A function, you can type in your questions at any point in time so that you don't forget them, and we will get to them at an appropriate time. If you have a particular speaker or panelist that you would like to pose that question to, please indicate in front. And unless your life is at danger, we hope that you will be able to identify yourself when you pose your questions. Okay, so without, well, I've been speaking a bit too much now, but we should get this session officially on its way. On the first topic about data innovation, policy and tools, we will have someone from IMDA, Ms. Lee Chin In, share on policy shifts and data innovation tools to encourage the flow of data as well as a wider use of that data. So Ms. Lee is the Deputy Director for AI and Data Innovation of the Data Innovation Program Office at IMDA. She leads the team there, and it focuses on developing programs such as the Facebook Accelerator Singapore and Data Regulatory Sandbox to support businesses in their data innovation journey and growing the data innovation ecosystem. So Ms. Lee, over to you.
Hello, hi, good afternoon. Give me a minute, let me share this. So for Singapore, we have identified that data is a key capital to enable digital economy. So some of you are probably familiar with IMDA's SME Go Digital program that focus in helping SMEs to go digital. And then a few months back, we also announced a new digital office, and that focus helping micro SMEs such as like hawkers, the market store owners to go digital, at least to adopt the e-payment to enable online services. So moving forward, we will be having more initiatives to help businesses to use data and also to exchange insights. But what I'm going to share with you are some of the regulations related initiatives that we have put in place. Mainly, our purpose is to lower the barrier for businesses to innovate with the use of data, which is a little different from the initiatives that I shared earlier, which is a little bit on providing incentives to motivate people to go onto a digital program. Yeah. I think this is something very familiar to all of you, all of us here. I think digital is really the new norm moving forwards. Really is to minimize our physical contact for our own safety. And we can see that this has manifested in a few ways. During the circuit breaker, we have relied very heavily on digital access for things like remote working, operating our business, online entertainment, be it watching Netflix or even virtual concerts. Don't know about y'all, but me personally, I have actually watched a couple of virtual concerts. Very interesting. It's really a new way of enjoying entertainment. Yeah. The F&B businesses also, we can see, they have also tapped on the social media, digital tools to enable food delivery. They created pre-order systems to manage the crowd, as well as also to minimize contacts by using e-payment. So many SMEs and hawkers have really managed to stay afloat, even experience a boost in footfall thanks to going digital. So digitalization really will be a mainstay if already not so today. So for example, I think we have all been having virtual meetings. Based on what we understand, the volume of virtual meetings conducted globally on a digital conference at Zoom has seen really 20 times increase from December to March this year. Yeah, December last year to March this year. So really, digital will be a new normal moving forward. So in order to combat the disruption brought by the COVID, demand for the digital system has also escalated. For example, demand for digital payment system, we understand as we spoke to some of the startups, really the demand has shot up by about 10 times for some of them. This whole lengthy lockdown has forced many reluctant businesses and even consumer demographics, such as the senior citizens, to go online. And this has left many organizations really quickly trying to adapt to these changes, find ways to stay afloat in this very difficult situation. But one thing is very clear to us, digitalization has brought about increased collection of data. And this means that there are actually a lot more opportunities for businesses to use data that they have collected. There are many ways to use data, for example, to track how many users behaves and how the users uses the website, how long the users spend on your website, how they navigate the page, which page holds their attention longer, etc. So all this information can improve the experience of the customers, and this data is definitely useful. But the value is also limited because this is just from your own users whom you know they are interested in your product. But what else are they interested in? If your data can be combined with similar data from other websites, then generalize the learnings and then you can be developed, the learnings can be developed, then you can find out more about how a certain demographics actually interact with certain types of websites. And this will be a very big benefits to the companies. In one of our recent survey, we actually find that 56 companies says that data sharing is beneficial, but there are a lot of challenges to data sharing, which I will also share later. So we find that data sharing is very important for us to enable data flow for businesses. So this is an example of what we have seen so far, how people use data and how people use data, how do they share data and what benefit it has, how it has benefited businesses. We see three main types of sharing happening. One is really to personalize services, which is really the ability for you to cross-sell, upsell to the same customers. So one of the example is, as you can see in the slide, so Telefonica, they actually has a dedicated data unit and they help companies to gain customer insights so that they can serve their customer better in various industries. Yeah, so in turn, it actually helps to increase their market share and improve customer experience. The other way people use data from other sources is really to improve the value chain effectiveness. So for example, BMW's connected supply chain function as a basis, as a communication and information for supply to the factory for all the process partners involved. So this actually helps to increase the business resilience and optimize their operation efficiencies as well. The third benefits or the third use case that we see is offering new services from the use of data. So for example, Amazon, they disrupted the finance industry and they now actually offer loans. So they created new business opportunity using different data, and they reach out to the different partners and they reach out to their own customers with the use of data. But as I said just now, actually data sharing comes with quite a fair bit of challenges. In our last couple of years, working with companies and industry, and we speak about data sharing, they do share with us these four main challenges. One is really to find a common partner who has the same objective as you as a business, and at the same time not your competitors, is really not easy. And at the same time, you need to have a certain trust with these partners. So you need to establish a common objective and trust between partners. So that itself takes a fair bit of effort. The second one, typically what we hear, because IMDA, right? So we are also part of PDPC, or PDPC is part of IMDA. So we also hear businesses feedback that there's a lot of concerns over data protection. Actually, some of the concerns are not really about whether the regulation allows or not. It's about the differences in the practice of the data protection. So for example, company A has a certain data protection practice, and then company B has a different one. So when they come to talking about ability to use the data and to share the data, it differs because it also depends on what was for example, the consent seek upfront for, and what's the risk appetite of different companies. So there's some differences that's why I say there's a difference in data protection practices. After they sort out who's the partner, they roughly have the same data protection practices, really then it comes down to the detail of negotiation, right? Negotiation will involve things like legal agreement, data sharing agreement. How do I know, how do we agree upon what is the data used for? What are the data sets we should each put on the table? How do we know whether they have equal value or not? Yeah. And then finally it's about technical, how do we implement it technically, right? So based on this, it does sound like data sharing requires a lot of effort from the company's business perspective, and therefore, so what IMDA does is then we put in place some of the tools and policies that we hope that we could help to lower some of this barrier. So if we look at some of this, I would like to highlight three things that we do. Firstly, for business in general, businesses that wants to innovate using data, currently we are actually doing PDPA review. I'm sure some of you are aware of it. Yeah. So within this this PDPA review, what we are trying to do is to identify areas where we could encourage companies to innovate with data at the same time protecting the consumers. Yeah. Then for the businesses that have started looking at data sharing, the process, but wondering, not too sure how to go about doing it. So what we have done is we have then launched a trusted data sharing framework. This is really we'll call it a 101 framework. It's really to encourage businesses that want to start but not too certain how to do about it and would like to find out what are some of the process that people typically go through. The third tool that we have introduced in the last couple of years, I think it's about a year plus ago, is a data regulatory sandbox. So this is really for companies that already decided that they want to get into a data partnership. But there are some uncertainty when it comes to data regulations. So for example, just like I mentioned about overcoming the differences in data protection practices. So one company thinks that it can be done, the other company may not be too sure, and therefore we have a data regulatory sandbox where then you can come to IMDA or PTPC and seek clarity. So next few slides, I'll just go into a little bit detail about a little bit more information. So on the policy shifts, we have identified two areas where we think that it will help companies to innovate with data. One is data portability. This is really a concept of through the consent of a consumer who's prepared to let another organization have the data. So it will allow the consumer to request for organization A to transfer their data or to copy their data from organization A to organization B. This is to encourage the flow of data so that the second organization B, can actually use the data to either you create new products out of it or you provide better services, more personalized services. Yeah. So with data portability, what we intend to do in the coming year, when we have put this obligation within the Act, is to provide clarity and specificity in the areas of what are the data that will be involved in data portability, how do we do it technically, what are how do we address consumers' concerns, and how do we make sure that when the data move from organization A to organization B, the receiving organization can actually receive it without too much hassle. The second area that we have identified is a data innovation provision. Maybe some of you are not aware. This data innovation provision actually is a proposal from the industry to PTPC to say that actually the industry need to be able to use the data that they already collected through their process of transactions, etc., without too much concern about whether they could or they could not. Yeah. So this data innovation provision is really to open up an opportunity for businesses to use their data without having the need to consent and notification. However, it's really limited to business purpose, for example, operational efficiency, to create new product and new service development. So these are the two policy shifts that we are going to have moving forward. If you want to have more information about this review, PDPA review, you can look under the PTPC website. There's a couple of public consult that was launched, and I think currently we are in the process of working through the details now. Yeah. This is a trusted data sharing framework. We also launched this last year. Like I said earlier on, this is really a 101 guide. So what we have done is we have gotten the industry inputs based on what we have learned through the industry engagement. We also spoke to industry to find out what is the process that they have gone through, what are the concerns that they need to address, and we have documented it into this framework. So what we hope this framework can do is to give the businesses a systematic approach for you to know what is required for data sharing. So sometimes I call this establishing a common data sharing language, so that you have a common way to describe the process, you have a common way to talk to your partners and say that, oh, let's start to talk about data sharing agreement, for example. And then what does a data sharing agreement then look like? Within this guide, we also have some templates, legal templates that you could refer to. So we hope that you, with these resources within the framework, then that will help to hasten the process and then ease the process of the negotiations. Within this data sharing framework, we also launched a guide to data valuation for data sharing. Again, this is more of to have a common way for businesses to talk about value of data. Of course, within this guide, we have 3 approaches. I must say that there could be more than 3 approaches. These are just common ones that we highlight, just so that the companies are able to then start a conversation about how do I decide whether my data that I put on the table and the data that you put on the table are of almost equal value. Yeah. So this is a bit of a detail of the framework, which I think you can download. Just now, in this slide, there's a QR code here, so you could actually use the QR code and download the framework. This essentially, there are 4 parts to it. The first part talks about business motivation, why people want to share data. Do we have a common agreed reason? And then what are some of the data sharing model that businesses can look into? The second part is really about what are the legal considerations and what are the regulatory considerations that companies need to have. Third one talks about technical, how do we do it technically? And the fourth one talks about then what happens after the data is shared, or how do we handle the data after it's being shared? What are some of the legal obligations and all? Next, this is a data regulatory sandbox. There are 2 things that we do within the regulatory sandbox. The first one is on the left-hand side where we talk about supporting data collaboratives. What we mean is there will be businesses that come together and they say that they want to share data or to allow the data to flow from one company to another. It could also be within the organizations or subsidiaries, etc. Yeah. So, but there are some concerns that they have, and there are certain use cases that they have worked through, but they're not sure whether it is okay with the regulations and whether we have certain concerns or there are areas that they need to look out for. So this is where PTPC IMDA is close engagement with this group of businesses that come together, and they, of course, then they will then share with us the use case, and typically this use case needs to have consumer benefits, and again there are some things, and then they will share with us what are the clarity that they require in terms of regulations and policies. So what do the companies get from this support that we give through the data regulatory sandbox? They actually get the close engagement with regulators, because then we will follow with them through their discussion of the use cases, then we understand what's the intent, what is it that the companies are trying to do, is there any concerns that they need to take note of, what are some of the approaches that they could use to overcome some of the challenges, what are some of the acceptable approaches. This is what we do with data collaboratives. The other type of, the other engagement that we do under data regulatory sandbox is what we term as policy prototyping. And the purpose is really to engage the businesses. We have big ones, we have medium ones, we have also small ones, including startups that are interested in data innovation. And we discuss how, and through this policy prototyping, what we do is really to discuss how new policies that we have will be implemented in businesses. So what do the companies get? What we have done is, not sure if some of you have heard, IMD actually partners with Facebook on a Facebook Accelerator program. So through this accelerator program, Facebook and the designers will then come in and assist the startups, as well as we also invite the industry partners, basically to explore how these new policies can be meaningfully implemented while maintaining the consumer trust. Thought I will give a bit of example of what we have done in the next slide. So what we did was we worked with Facebook, then we organized what we call design jams. It's really to talk about how do we use design to overcome some of the compliance required by the different privacy laws. Yeah. So it's a workshop. It's a whole day or 2 days workshop. Basically, is to work with the participants, like the businesses, to develop the innovative UX and the best practices to obtain consent upfront. The reason why this particular one was on consent was because under the current PDPA review, one of the area that we are looking at is how do we relook at consent? What's the best way to communicate data use rather than looking at consent for the sake of consent? Yeah. So in our perspective, we want to encourage businesses to seek consent meaningfully, and therefore we work with we explore different ways with businesses to see how can this be done. So on the slide, you can see one of this is one of the design from the workshop that we have. So it's quite interesting. I think what it's trying to do is to use technology like chatbot to inform how data is actually being used. So what the designers will do is to work with the companies and come up with such a so the company will with discussion. They will talk about what are the best way to approach, who are the stakeholders that you are trying to talk to, and then they'll come up with a design like this. Then the businesses can then take this design and implement into their own product, the real product that they have. So if you're interested to find out more about this program, there's a QR code here. This is actually a report that we have done together with Facebook to talk about what's being discussed during the workshops. What are some of the outputs that we have? What are some of the innovative ways that we have come up with to engage consumer in terms of consent? So this is my last slide. So that was my last slide. I think if there's any questions, we'll keep it till later. Yeah, back to Brian.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. Yes, great. So, well, a couple of interesting points about what's happening on the government front. As Ms. Lee mentioned, some exciting developments there in terms of data portability. I think she's mentioned a bit more permission for business improvement and also a regulatory sandbox that everyone can look forward to. We are going to move on quickly next to our next speaker, and that's Ms. Sherry Loh from Great Eastern Life Assurance. She's going to talk about GE's Trustmark journey. And GE is one of the earliest adopters of the IMDA Data Protection Trustmark certification for the insurance sector. And so she'll be sharing about their certification journey, how it's helped Great Eastern strengthen their data protection standards, as well as bolstered their position as a trusted organization in the industry. Sherry is the DPO, the Data Protection Officer at Great Eastern Life, which is the largest insurance company in Singapore and Malaysia. And she has more than 10 years working experience in the financial industry and is a Certified Information Privacy Manager, the CIPM, as well as a Certified Information Privacy Technologist, the CIPT, with the IAPP, the International Association of Privacy for Professionals. So Sherry, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Let me flash my slides. Okay, a very good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sherry, the Data Protection Officer from Great Eastern. We are very honored to be invited here to share our Data Protection Trustmark certification journey. Okay, just a little bit about us. We are one of the largest life insurance for core business in Malaysia and Singapore. So established in 1908, we are actually celebrating our 112th birthday this year. Okay, so I'll just briefly walk you through some of the key aspects of the data protection certification, mainly in the areas of why did we start this journey, how did we get there, as well as what we have achieved. The first one, which I'm sure some of us might be curious, why will organizations apply for the DPTM? Well, I'm sure all of us know that the data protection landscape has evolved quite significantly over the past decades. In the past, when companies send a wrong letter to their customer, you'll simply call up the customer, apologize for the error, perform service recovery, and case will probably close. But in today's context, things are very different. Consumers like you and me, we are more savvy and we know our data protection rights. We are expecting organizations to take proper care of our data, and those who can do so definitely have more appeal, and we'll be more inclined to do business with them. At Great Eastern, we are an insurance firm, and therefore we do collect personal data, including slightly more sensitive information such as the health and medical records. So in this case, I think IMDA has launched the Data Protection Trustmark in a timely manner, as it does allow organizations to actually differentiate themselves in the market. So at GE, we wanted to get a certification in hope that it will actually affirm our commitment towards data privacy, as well as to show how we take your personal data very seriously. Here is a slide in terms of the key processes that we have gone through from the initial stage to the day we got the certification. So the first part is definitely the buy-in from the senior management and our business units. So some of us may ask, why do we actually need to apply for the trust mark? When we first brought this proposal to apply for the trust mark to our senior management, the support was generally there, but we do get questioned, how will this trust mark benefit GE? Particularly so we are a financial institution that's regulated by MAS that has lots and lots of different requirements and standards. So in terms of the incremental benefits, it's something that we have actually assessed and deliberated quite a bit. And also, we also considered the fact of the cost involved, the resources involved to actually get this 3-year certification where we actually need to renew ourselves every 3 years. So after much discussion, we actually decided to go ahead because we do see that the personal data space is getting more and more attention, and having the trust mark will actually help to make us a more trusted organization. So we were lucky to get a blessing from our senior management. And after that, we actually proceeded to with the application process. So during the application process, we actually spoke to a few assessment bodies that have been appointed by the IMDA, mainly to actually find out what are the criteria, what are the review process, how long the timeline, what documents do they need and what's not. So speaking to the few different assessment bodies help us understand how to prepare ourselves and what we are getting into. So eventually we actually selected ISO Cert, who has been guiding us in this whole certification process, as well as providing us with feedback and sharing with some of the market best practices when we actually have some queries on how to better improve certain areas in our internal processes. So then after the application process is where the real thing starts, which is the assessment. And of course, we don't get the assessment body on day one because at our side, we need to do our own prep work where we actually perform internal self-assessment to see if there are any areas that we could have missed out or there are areas that we need to further tighten. So during this process, we engage the business unit and leverage on the same opportunity to actually reiterate the importance of personal data protection. And so during the on-site reviews, the assessor actually came down to Great Eastern to actually walk through our processes, talk to different people, review documentation and lots of stuff. So it was really challenging in a sense that that whole day was jam-packed, where we have business unit after business unit coming one after another to actually meet the assessor. And of course, when the assessor came, we actually have to respond very quickly to their queries, as well as requests for documentations, as some of the staff were instant citing on the spot. So in this case, the review was really very so-called packed, and we are very thankful that, or rather I'm very thankful that we got the support from all the business unit to actually participate in this whole review exercise together. And towards the last part is on the certification. So after a very rigorous review and talking with all our assessment body, to and fro discussions and what's not, we finally managed to finalize our so-called report, which has been submitted to the IMDA for the independent review. And towards the last stage, it was really even tougher because IMDA has an eagle eye and they really scrutinized our report and asking for additional supporting documentation, making sure that we are really doing what we preach. So that's where there were a lot of discussion and communication with IMDA as well, mainly through our assessment body to actually make sure that we are meeting the requirements set forth by IMDA. So this end-to-end process took us quite a while. And finally, in July, we are very happy to actually get the trust mark. Okay, so in terms of what we have achieved, I mean, the benefits are obvious because in this whole process, everyone in the company actually came together to actually deliver and work for a common purpose, which is to actually show and demonstrate our attitude towards data protection. And what I'm happy is that we actually recognize the efforts by all the GE staff in achieving good data practices in their day-to-day work. Data protection doesn't come overnight, so a lot of things are being built on. And of course, we are not the best and definitely have areas to improve. And we will constantly strive to actually manage that. And as an organization, definitely having this trust mark as an early adopter will make us in a better position to market to our customers and also to our partners such as our agents and our employees and other business partners that we have. So this is a very brief sharing of our trust mark journey. And I will definitely encourage organizations who are able to actually go for the journey as well. So if you need more information, you can definitely look at the IMDA website or you can contact the IMDA folks. Yeah, so that is all. Thank you very much for the day. Brian, back to you.
Thank you so much, Sherry. Yes, that was very interesting. A recap of GE's Trustmark journey, and congratulations on getting your Trustmark. Next up, we have Raju Chalam. Raju is a fellow here at SCS, and he'll be talking about the Tech Tango. And it's about data innovation and sharing involving the understanding of the technical issues underlying access management, security vulnerabilities, data sets, and ethics around the engagement. So how can organizations identify and address the technical issues? What happens if you don't do so? This is where Raju is going to talk a little bit about. Now, Raju is obviously very, very involved with this particular area. He's the chief editor of the AI Ethics and Governance Body of Knowledge, the BOK, that the SCS has just announced. He's also a fellow here at SCS and also at the NUS Advanced Computing for Executives, or ACE. He has been in the ICT industry for a very, very, very long time and is the author of a book called Organ Gold, ORGAN Gold, on the illegal trade in human organs on the dark web. So without further, I'm going to ask Raju to take this away. Raju.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. Okay, I hope everyone can see this. Okay, my name is Raju. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Let's go straight into the topic. What am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about A, B, C, D, E. Access management. What is the baseline? What cybersecurity measures you need to have in place? Data sets, ethics, and engagement. I have one other screen, and the reason I want to show you this is I would urge you to visit the website on the screen. It's Asia's first AI, ethics, and governance body of knowledge tailored for practical issues related to human safety, fairness, privacy, data governance, and general ethical values. Okay, let's go to access management. Access management is about technical security measures. This is to ensure that each user is given minimum privileges to access data resources and to prevent non-authorized parties from getting access to the data. Be clear whether you're granting or are getting access by individuals or by organizations. Access by individuals is ideal because otherwise there may be hundreds of employees in an organization, and by default, everyone will get access, which is not what you want. So how do you prevent that from happening? You have something called KYC, which is mandatory in all bank accounts, as you know. You should follow similar procedures while sharing or accessing databases. Algorithmic screening is an automated, logic-driven screening to ensure that the customer or vendor is who he or she claims to be. Should you do manual or algorithmic screening? Ideally, you should do both, at least initially, to ensure authenticity of the other party. And the way to do that is also to look at, after KYC, to look at something called KTP, which is my next slide. Sorry. Know the purpose. Know the purpose because you got to know who needs the data and why. How long do they need the data? What are the audit logs you need to have in place for the data to be accessed? All of this is important because data is dynamic and data sets are required for a specific purpose and time. You can either set auto delete programs or mandate uh, manual deletes. In either case, ensure that both parties keep audit logs, just in case there are regulatory checks from either MAS or PDPC, or if you're doing business in EU from GDPR. But to do that, you need to know what is the baseline. So baseline refers to the original or initial stage or state of the data set. All the attributes of the data should be mapped and recorded, because when the time or purpose of the sharing is over, you can check for variance. Any variance is allowed, any variance that is allowed is called a tolerance. Any variance that is not allowed or out of scope or outside of tolerance is called a discrepancy. All discrepancies must be logged and automatically flagged for manual assessment. So that can be done automatically because as we just discussed, data is dynamic and data can change or take on different characteristics. So let's look at monitoring the metrics. The entire monitoring sequence can be automated or programmed. The need for manual intervention only arises when a discrepancy is flagged. So the important thing to remember here is you got to monitor what is the data composition and characteristics, how many authorized users have you allowed, what is the end state of the data, how much has it changed, how much has it meshed, because data, as I said, can take on different characteristics once it is meshed. And you got to monitor it because the data is basically your asset. And one way to do that is the SLA, service level agreement. So it is not true that service level agreements are only legal documents. An SLA is also a technical document. The technical aspects of the data set sharing must be captured in the SLA as well, either in the appendix or in the running clauses in the SLA. Note that companies will buy data sets from different vendors and will mesh the data for analytics. The SLA must therefore cover how your data can be or is allowed to be manipulated when meshed with other data sets. That is because, again, I want to emphasize the point, data is dynamic, not static. It can take on attributes when it is meshed with other data. On the other hand, data behaves differently while at rest and while it is in motion, with additional data packets getting attached to the data while it is in motion. So you got to know these technical aspects. You, in the sense, your CISO, your chief data officer, your technical teams have to monitor all of this. And why is this so important to note technically? Because of cybersecurity. So cybersecurity has attack vectors, and as you know, cybersecurity is the biggest concern for all companies right now. There are two issues here. One is MITM, which is man in the middle, which is on the network layer, while MITB is man in the browser, which happens in the application layer. Very few companies are aware of both of these because most of them look at only MITM. But MITB is more worrisome because it infects a web browser. The MITB attack can modify web pages or add malware in a covert fashion, which is invisible to both the user and the host web application. How does this impact you? You need to take special technical precautions if you're selling or buying data which has PII or personally identifiable information in it. What are those technical steps you should take? There are two of them or three of them right now, but two of them are together, which is CM and SOAR. CM is security, information and event management, which is generally practiced by many companies all over the world. SOAR is relatively new. It stands for security orchestration, automation, and response. Practically speaking, CM and SOAR go hand in hand. So it is best to use both. Your CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, or security teams can set up CM and SOAR monitoring mechanisms which are automated. If you are a bank or a healthcare institution dealing with PII, you may need to consider MDR. MDR is relatively new. Its managed detection and response is a threat detection tool. MDR may utilize an array of tools, including CM. MDR may also use machine learning or behavioral analytics to find if there is an attack on data sets or if data sets have been attacked while they are on the move. So what are data sets? In a way, in one way, raw data is like crude oil. It rises in value once it is refined. It's important to understand the difference and the implications of first, second, and third party data. First party data is your data, which you have collected from your customers or suppliers. Second party data is somebody else's first party data, which is shared with you, like your channel partners with whom you have a special relationship. Third party data is sold by data aggregators. Who are those? I don't know if you have heard of these names. Finicity, Yodlee, FinServe, MX, Plaid, BlueKai, Peer 39, Excelate. These are third-party data aggregators. They buy data from various sources, aggregate them into massive data sets, which are then sold to companies. What are the implications of such data and data sets? You have basically two issues there, which are masking techniques. There are various data masking techniques. The two most common are anonymization and pseudo anonymization. With anonymization, you scrub the data for any information it may serve or that may serve as an identifier of that person. So you just scrub the data for any information. That is anonymization. With pseudo-anonymization, you mask the identifier field, but keep the rest of the fields intact. So how does that work in the real world? For example, John Tan in a pseudo-anonymized database, only John Tan and his NRIC number may be pseudo-anonymized. So his name may be A1, B2, C3. His NRIC number may be in a 12 digit, which has no resemblance to his actual NRIC number. In some cases, such as for testing purposes, you can synthesize data fields which are closely related to the reality. So what are some questions you should ask yourself before you do all of this? There are basically two questions. Number one, what is the purpose of sharing your data or seeking second or third party data? Can some fields that contain PII be removed? Number two, will the data be aggregated or segregated for analysis? What does that basically mean in the real terms? There are degrees of segregation or aggregation. Data segregation is also called data segmentation. Once you filter the data set, you are segregating or narrowing the records for a specific purpose. On the other hand, you may get data sets from various sources which you want to aggregate first before you segregate. So this depends on various use cases. None of this is right or wrong. These are all normal practices. This is what all companies do with data sets. It is just that you should be aware of the implications and have controls or mechanisms to prevent abuse. That is where the issue of corporate ethics and engagement comes into play. So why should you bother about corporate ethics and engagement? Because that is because you should be aware that data sets are about human behavior. They contain inherent bias. Bias at any individual level is not apparent to the individual. It may even be welcomed in a specific group or groups. For example, just look at the polarization between pro-Trumpers and anti-Trumpers. Each side believes that the other side is biased. This is normal and even natural. But when it comes to analytics, the inherent bias may reveal an abnormal outcome. That is why you need both algorithmic and human intervention to ensure fairness, transparency, accountability of the data set and of the use of the data set. Ethics is a whole new Pandora's box, so we will not go there at this time. Suffice it to say that in the final outcome, you need to note three important points, and they are A, B, and C, which is my final slide. A, B, and C. And the reason you got to note this is because you got to avoid algorithmic arrogance. What does that mean? Use algorithms intensively, but keep testing it to be sure that it is in tune with the real world environment. Beware of background bias, which we already discussed to an extent. And finally, craft controls carefully. Controls are like clinical trials. You deliberately inject or introduce faults or placebos to check whether the algorithm can catch them. You should also control how PII data is handled using both algorithmic programs and human oversight. Watch how you handle data carefully because the regulators are watching you. And on that note, this is my final slide. Please get in touch with me if you have any questions regarding ethics or use of data or governance. Thank you and hope you will stick around for the panel discussion. Back to Brian.
Thank you, Raju. Well, certainly there is a lot of material. It's not as easy as ABC as Raju makes it out to be. If you're wondering how can we get all the notes of the content that has been going on, don't worry. SES is recording these events and it will be up on the SES site if you do want to retrieve this, or perhaps to pass this to your colleague so that they can catch up with the entire webinar. Before I ask Jeffrey to come on, Jeffrey, our next speaker, we're going to take a very short polling break. So I'm going to ask the organizers to pull up a quick poll, just 3 questions for everyone. So just select your answers from 1 to 5 and then scroll down to the next question. And after you've answered all 3, please click end poll. Okay, I see they have given you a timer to count that down. Great. Okay, if you're done with question 1, scroll down to question 2, and if you're done with that, then scroll down to question 3. Very good. We have a 50% participation rate so far, rising to 55. Okay, let's give everyone another 15 seconds. Okay, good. And we'll call the poll to an end. Great. Next up, we have Jeffrey Lim, who will be talking about the essential ingredients of a legal governance framework and why that matters. For data innovation to happen, one must understand the need for a governance strategy. And so he'll be covering things like general legal restrictions on sharing and repurposing data, the need for a strategy to do so, legal design, and implementation. Jeffrey is the honorary legal advisor for the SCS and also a director at Joyce A. Tan and Partners. He has deep experience as a technology lawyer in data governance, cybersecurity, privacy, and data protection. And he has worked on large-scale IT commercial transactions, advised on artificial intelligence projects, and regularly advises Singapore clients and MNCs in cybersecurity and data governance issues and projects. He's also the co-chair of the Singapore Law Society's Cybersecurity and Data Protection Committee, among others. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Jeffrey to take over and tell us about data governance frameworks. Jeffrey.
Thank you, Brian. I'm going to share my screen first and then tell you maybe a little bit more about what I do as well, just to add to what Brian's mentioned. But before we do that, the plan really is to talk through a couple of things about the law. So most of the time people talk about the law, sometimes their eyes roll over because they think, oh, it's just a bunch of rules, do's and don'ts, and yes, go see a lawyer, get documents written. I think it's important that when we look at data protection, data privacy, data governance issues, we are also looking at an aspect of the law and legal practice and legal advisory tools, which are not what I think the general community has been worn to death with. They're not always about documents. So I wanted to take this opportunity to talk a bit about legal thinking and solutions. What exactly is it when we say that when we do a legal engineering process for looking at issues like this, what exactly are we bringing to the table? And that really is answering a couple of questions. Just first understanding what does legal thinking entail and what are legal solutions? Just what is that, right? And then the other next issue really is to ask yourselves, well, what's the problem on hand today? I mean, all legal solutions are meant to solve a problem. And it's really about the need to free data, free in a way that allows you to share it easily. And then realizing that the solution is about a process. It's not a single one document or one stuffy T's and C's which you put in front of somebody and then say that you're done. It's actually more than that. It's actually a way of thinking. It's a way of considering and thinking through your business. And I want to talk a little bit about that as well. And that talks about the solution as well, which is legal design. What do we mean by legal design and how do we implement legal concepts of legal design? And this is going to really be helpful because I think in terms of everyone's role in the organization, there is something there for them. And you realize that actually this is a way to encourage a certain culture of data sharing. Now, very briefly, Brian's happily introduced it. I just wanted to quickly say a little bit on top of all this. So we've been around, the firm has been around for 22 years. We're ranked in everything. We've got all the usual badges of accreditation. The interesting thing about our firm, I think, and I think this is probably what's driving the viewpoint here, is that two of the directors, at least myself and Joyce, we both spent time in-house. And I don't know if you ever worked with an in-house lawyer versus a practitioner. There is a difference when you have that, because a person who spends a bit of time in-house means that he's been spending time not as a lawyer, but as an officer of a company. And that also means that every issue, every legal response that he has to prepare, he has to think of it not as a lawyer necessarily, but as a person who's minded to assist the company. And that's fundamentally an important shift. I'll tell you a little bit more about that as I get into that. I've had pleasure working with Raju as well. I really enjoyed his talk just now. And Raju talked about the Singapore Computer Society AI book of body of knowledge. The BOK is something I also contributed to. I helped lead the drafting of one of the legal chapters. And again, if you look at the BOK, you'll see that it's multidisciplinary. Everyone has an angle to it. And to me, that encapsulates legal solutions at one angle. So let me demonstrate something. And this is a story, because I believe it's always helpful to share some things in the form of story. It's easy to understand the concept. This is the story of the wrong phone OS. So in my time in-house, which was some time ago, I worked at a company that produced handhelds, and that was one of the business that it had. And I had a very interesting exposure to what is meant as a legal solution when I was in this role. The issue that I encountered one day involved the fact that my company sent a batch of phones into all its customers, its telcos. They were selling these phones. They had spent, I think, millions advertising to the public that this phone had a certain Android OS, and that there were certain things that were all in it and had all these features and functions. But because of a supply chain problem, the phones that were actually sitting in the warehouses did not have any of those features. And at that point, the managers, the business people came to me and they said, okay, we have a real problem here. Can you tell us what we can do about it? What's the legal problem that we might face and how can we overcome it? So there I was, very young, young in terms of in-house experience. I went to take a look at the usual laws, look at recalls, product warranty issues, truth in advertising laws, and I wrote up this very long email and I sent it to my lead counsel at the time, my general counsel. So he pulls me over very gently. He's a very nice man, and he comes up to me and he says, "Jeffrey, why are you sending me this long memo?" And I looked at him and said, well, because of all this, I began to unpack it, from a legal standpoint. I said, oh, there was this rule, there was that rule. And then looked at me and he said, why don't you just tell the business people to print stickers that said to boot up your phone and show you go to this site and download the OS and stick it on every single one of the boxes. I looked at him for a minute, then I realized, oh my God, he's right. That's the legal solution. So you see, it wasn't anything clever. It wasn't about writing a legal document. It wasn't doing a memo. It was something very practical on the ground and just recognizing the environment and situation that you were in. And that, to me, that story encapsulates what I understand to be legal solutions. And nowhere more in data protection nowhere more do you see this in operation when you look at data protection, privacy by design, and all those issues. So if you don't get it, if you don't understand that, that leads to a problem. People will say, this person's always writing memos, always drafting long advice, and never helps. He always gives issues. So you become the lawyer blocker, right? The problem, the guy who presents problems. But if you understand legal solutions, you become the lawyer solver, right? The guy who looks at your solution and gives you an answer. So legal advice, then I realized, look, we lawyers in practice are very good at identifying risks. We're not that good at identifying opportunities. And sometimes we don't know enough about our client businesses, how they work, what are the things on the ground, what is the people, the market that they're addressing, the users of their solutions. And so it's key that to think about these things in certain aspects is to realize that legal practice and lawyers, good lawyers who are going to help you in this space, are really about that. The question is not what is wrong, what's prohibited, it's what's the way forward, right? And so if you think about it, it's not always about legal documents. So it wasn't about a legal document. It wasn't about a brief to the Consumer Protection Society. This is more about putting stickers on boxes. This is about solving practical issues. And if you think about it, it's just simply answering questions of how to, where to, and when to. Now, we lawyers might appear like we're charging for per documents, but the reality of it is that we're really applying our minds to these issues. And I want to encourage that sort of understanding, because every function you're in accounting, financing, whether in operations, technology, it will all boil down really to that. Understand the strategy that's going to get you through the particular issue at hand. And in data protection, it's very important. And don't confuse the tactic or the solution with the strategy. There's a vision of where you need to go and how you need to establish it. And documents themselves, they might express a tactic, a policy might express a particular solution, but in and of itself, it's actually part of a larger vision. Okay. So let's look at data protection, and I wanted to very briefly touch on the problem at hand. It's more about freeing the data, right? So we all know data sharing is important. It gives us insight, because when you share data, you can have different users, different use cases, different combination data, and all this allows for an opportunity for someone to look at the data again and extract new value from it. Of course, the extraction of value isn't just a straight one-to-one. You have to take the data that was shared to you, and you need to apply a process to it to refine it and extract insight. The refinement doesn't happen in a vacuum. So you're going to look at a whole set of data, and you think to yourself, I'm looking for a particular result. And then I look into it and I say, okay, what's the goal? What's the objective I'm trying to serve? And I'm really repurposing the data to some extent, because I'm trying to look at data which was perhaps applied or obtained because of a transaction, but I'm going to mine new insight and values and use cases for it. Similar to the way in which an earlier speaker had talked about Amazon repurposed all the transactional data and said, hey, I can produce a new business line about loans, financing. Now that means I've refined my understanding of what that data is telling me, and it gives me an opportunity to actually, monetize it. And so it does need to be refined. It needs to be sharpened. But once you do, it has value, right? So data has value. It's sometimes in an identifiable form. You'll find that the reality of it is the more data you have, the better options you might get. And then, of course, you have to understand that at the end of the day, you're really looking at the insight that you're getting, not necessarily the individual person that you're drilling down to. So to some extent, the value is in profiles. The value is in how people are actually looking at the data from a certain perspective, not necessarily knowing that specific individual. And so solutions might need to be thought of in terms of anonymization and de-identification. Those two are different concepts, but just for now, just understand that process. Now, for data to be free, it's a process. And what do I mean by that? If you look at just this slide, for example, you'll see that really is a bunch of things. The cells that are marked data protection, privacy, and cybersecurity, these are hard laws. Various jurisdictions have express them in some form or other. There may be a general cross-sector data protection law, just like in Singapore or in the EU or in other jurisdictions, but there might also be sector-specific regulations. And then you have cybersecurity, which is an issue in itself. And sometimes you have certain aspects of considerations that go into that. And you can see next to the data protection privacy cell, I've used the 9 obligation reference that you see in Singapore law. So you have to procure, in order for you to collect, use, or disclose personal data, you must obtain consent. Consent is never given in a vacuum, it's for a purpose. The purpose must be sufficiently notified. You have to be transparent about how you actually use the data so you can account to an individual. A person can ask for the information by asking for access and correction, which is to say, to ask you to account for what you've done with that data and what data that you have. If there's an error in the data, you must correct that data and communicate the corrected data to an organization with whom you shared that data in the last 12 months or the look back period. And then you have to take obligations to protect data from unauthorized access, misuse, or loss. And then when you use data, you must use it accurately. Part of what you must try and take reasonable steps to ensure that the data is accurate. Part of what we do sometimes in AI is making sure that we avoid bias. Bias is a form of inaccuracy. right? And so there is an element there that talks about how you're taking steps to ensure the data you rely on is accurate before you actually take a decision based on the insight that you obtain. And then, of course, data protection laws also have data transport, data export restrictions. Don't send the data from one country to the other until you ensure that certain conditions are met. And then the retention obligation, don't hold on to data for longer than you need to, unless you are trying to fulfill the business or legal purpose. And then if you look at cybersecurity, it's not just about cyber hygiene and sound practices and ensuring you have a team or a process in place to respond to incidences, but also dealing with the regulators' efforts to ensure that they're protecting infrastructure, going into investigations. So you must be ready for that as well. And then, of course, there's data governance, the larger concepts of making sure that data is available, it's usable, it's consistent. It has all the integrity that's in it. It's secure, and there's a proper delegation of roles, and so on and so forth. And so when you think through this whole web of arrangements, what you've got is a discussion about how you free data is really about processing it, going through that whole set of steps and methodologies, thinking through what are the things that are necessary to ensure that the data is ready for a way that it can be shared responsibly. So I can give you a quick example of how a bunch of design choices might be made. And this is what I mean by legal design solutioning, right? So you might have in a typical setup, say an IoT device or product, and interfaces or syncs data, and as you can see in this chart, with say a mobile platform. And then the data that gets pushed to cloud, it might get to a customer app. And in this case, it goes into the customer's devices. And there, as at the same time, data is pumped to a data access service. And then you think about, okay, well, what's the web of arrangements I need to ensure are in place to meet the legal obligations? And you can see right here in this chart a number of standard form documents that you might need to think about that might apply for this business arrangements. You've got one company document that has to deal with the client, basically what they are trying to do, putting out the documents that face their data subjects, their end user DBPs, maybe their software as a service EULAs, right, or the web portals. And then another document that addresses their partnership arrangements. Perhaps this has to do with how the customers' users, the partners' users use it, as well as a licensing solution on top of that. And then you have the interfaces around all the various aspects like handling cloud arrangements, cloud agreements, dealing with the APIs and SDKs for development of the software and solutions. And all of this, of course, there are legal documents in place. But just as importantly are all the data flows that you see in this chart. They have to be supported by processes as well. Someone's looking at the data, ensuring that the appropriate checkpoints are nailed, that there's proper handling of data, there's appropriate protection procedures and responses that could be called into account if and when there is an issue. And these are really all about individual discussions that you have with all the line managers and the people who actually deal with the organization. And really that's about solutioning already. And you're thinking in the back of your mind, the legal rules and how they present it. But just like the sticker that you put on the box in the case of the phone, it's not really as complex necessarily as preparing a whole long document that people read. It might be as simple as saying step 1, 2, 3, do this, do that, make sure you ensure this, make sure you ensure that. And some of that is systems engineering, some of that is operational engineering. It is multidisciplinary, but ensuring that you embed in the logic of everything that you do the design choices that you make, because you might be able to save yourself some effort up front. So legal design implementation is really about things like whether I anonymize or de-identify, right? So these are two different things, right? Anonymization is doing it in a way where it's irreversible, right? You can't get to the point where it's re-identified again. De-identification is merely removing the unique identifiers or things which ex facie could identify an individual. And that's not quite the same thing. Right? And then asking yourself, well, what data are you going to share? What is the purpose of the sharing? Were the consents aligned for that purpose? If I'm going to repurpose it, what should I do? Do I get new consents? How do I place decision points? So it might be best if there's a lot of dynamic sharing that from time to time, in your solutions, you think about putting a user interface that provides easy design solution and choices for a data subject so that they can actually manage the data in a more active and dynamic way. And in one sense, that consent obligation becomes more realistic. I think earlier, one of the speakers also shared that they have these workshops in place. That's very much a question of legal solutioning as well, right? So you ask yourself all these questions and you say, well, let's get it out into our products and services. And you must be prepared not to get it right the first time. There's always some element of trial and error. And most importantly, also, you have to future-proof what you need to do. Because the law changes, you should be prepared to change your solutions as well. Sometimes make it easier for you to come back and look into it again. There's one project I'm doing now with a client where basically we break up all the design choices we made, consent choices, certain decisions and touch points. And we say, if it's sitting in one document or it's sitting in one interface, it doesn't quite work. So we're going to sort of delegate or put into appropriate junctures of the user experience where that could crop up. And this allows you to diffuse across the product a very intuitive way of navigating how a particular data subject might deal with a particular product. And that is really saying to yourself, if I need to change one thing, I know where I'm going to go, where I'm going to change it. And my changes can be incremental. It doesn't have to, restart everything over and over again. So this is my last slide, and I just wanted to encourage everyone to think about legal solutioning as something that isn't just particularly for lawyers. I think if you think about everything I've said, it isn't really just about that. It is really about imbibing with you a certain logic, a certain way of thinking through these issues. And to me, that's the legal perspective. It's not something that's peculiarly and particularly just for lawyers. It's actually for all individuals. So Brian, thank you. I think I'll hand the floor back to you.
Oh, thank you very much, Jeffrey. I think certainly a lot of questions. Do hang on for a moment, Jeffrey. I'm going to get Raju and Sherry to join us online for a quick Q&A for some questions that have been posed by the attendees so far. So Raju and Sherry, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Great. So I think while Sherry is coming on, let me just also update you. Miss Lee from IMDA had to leave for another appointment. And so if you've seen, she's answered two of the questions that were posed to her. We will alert her to some of the later questions that were posed for her. And we'll see whether she has a response to that. But we have Jeffrey, Raju, and I hope Sherry, who are here. Let me just throw a few questions first. I think first to Raju. So anonymous attendee has asked, access management seems to put the onus on individuals to grant access to third parties for usage of their personal data. What happens if these individuals lack understanding on these matters or do not have data literacy skills, especially in the case of seniors and those who are perhaps with a mental disability?
So that's a very good question. The legal aspects of that, I think Jeffrey would be ideal to answer. But from the technical side, there is very little the individual can do, because the very fact that you browse a website or you download an app, you are automatically giving or granting access of your cookies or yourself to the organization concerned. So how does that work? It's the onus is not on the individual, the onus is on the company. So if there is a data breach, the individual is protected by law because PDPC, GDPR, or whichever law there is, will go after the company which breached the data. So from that angle, individuals or consumers are well protected. So like you, I go to hundreds of websites. All those websites are logging in my IP address. All those websites download cookies into my computer, which I can delete, but the cookie is still, my IP address, and some of my details are still with the companies where I visit. So you can't do anything about it at the individual level, which is just as good, because if every individual were to grant individual access, then it would be very onerous for you to get all those apps for free. I'm going to stop here.
Okay, I'm not sure, Jeffrey, do you have anything to chime in on?
I think it's important to recognize that, and this is a good question. It's important to recognize that a lot of the legal frameworks in place have to do with, to some extent, consumer autonomy over decisions that you make about data. And the question really is, how effective and how real is that autonomy? How transparent and how engaged are your users? So it's not just a question of data literacy skills. It's also how an individual, how engaged the individual is in the issue of granting the consents and giving some control. I think there's a study somewhere that says that the number of individuals who actually take the time to read a proper consent statement, or do they just scroll through and click and immediately once the button lights up, and then they just go for it, because what they really want is the benefit of these products and services. So the truth is that the consent framework, the grant of autonomy to individuals to make use of the data, some of that is really more about how enlightened as a society we are over awareness of these issues. And so society is not homogeneous. There are different groups of people. Some are more aware, some are less aware. Some people scrutinize, some don't scrutinize. What's important is that we don't think that this is the be all and end all, because as an organization, if you're navigating that, it's good that you procure consents the way that you can be disciplined about it. But the truth of it also is that internally, you should have processes to allow withdrawal consent, ensure that there's appropriate ways to rework things if things, so that there are fail-safe approaches across the board. So my long answer really is it's not entirely just up to the data subjects. It's also really about how you go beyond the choices that individuals make and act responsibly in relation to the data that you have.
Okay. Just staying with you, Jeffrey, another question for you. Given that some stickers are more expensive than others, should companies do a cost-benefit analysis before embarking on data innovation projects? And how do they go about doing this? Is this like a legal audit or a compliance consultation? What's that process like?
So I would say that as a starting point, the legal perspective is just one of the many perspectives that you do when you look at data innovation. Obviously, there must be a business case that drives it. And so an analysis has to be conducted. I think really that's the first thing you should do, to understand what the business objectives are and what the potential return could be from the innovation project in question. Because everything else that lines up is a cost, is a risk, even if there's opportunity. So that's the first thing that needs to be done. It's not necessarily a legal audit, not at the start, but certainly framing and scoping the reason why you're going to do this and what the hope for benefit is. Everything else is really about then executing against that, because if we believe the promise of the benefit from it is there, then you do begin that process of weighing up the costs. And it could be that you position in these projects checkpoints with various legal stakeholders, with the various stakeholders. If you look at the AI SES BOK, for example, there is a checklist there that looks at legal governance. And what it does, one of the things it does is to prescribe organizations and tell organizations to look at the project in question and break it up and get the appropriate disciplinary reviews across the stages. So someone does need to manage it, someone does need to pilot it, and to pull in the stakeholders at the right time. There's no one single solution or a single approach that will work at all situations, but you do have to have that transparency over who's giving and weighing in on that arrangement.
Okay, thank you, Jeffrey. I think one last question. Sherry, are you there, Sherry? Sherry, you have to unmute yourself if you need to speak. Never mind. Let's move on. The last question for you, Raju. This one. Freeing data, allowing data to be free is a double-edged sword. Potholes and pitfalls line the road to monetization or after. Why? Because the number of data-related lawsuits. So Google has just been faced with a big one. Facebook, Twitter, lawsuits galore going around. What's your comment on this?
Yes, like I said, the onus of protecting the data depends on the company which is collecting the data. And the company that's collecting the data has to specify right up front in the agreement that we blindly agree to in most cases for what purpose it is collecting the data and what it intends to do with the data. So the biggest fines are by the EU community, and EU has put huge fines on Google, on Microsoft, Facebook, because they were not consistent with their policies about collecting and using data for authorized purposes, or authorized in the sense for what they intended to collect the data. The most famous case is Cambridge Analytica, for instance, in the UK, which used Facebook data to allegedly tweak the election results in 2016 to benefit one candidate in the United States. So these things will continue to happen. And when we go to the panel discussion, I would like to give you some more incidents of how big data breaches are and how big the fines are going to be. That's why PDPC is very clear that you got to protect your customers' data. You got to protect the individual's data. Breaches will continue to happen. Hacking will continue to happen. But unless you have adequate measures in place to ensure that you have got measures to mitigate against these hackings, you are at fault. If you don't have any, let's say, mitigation measures, if your data is as it was collected, raw form, without any encryption, without any anonymization, and that is subject to a breach, the fines on you, not just in terms of penalty in monetary terms, but in reputational risk, can be massive. So I'm going to stop there.
Thank you for that, Raju. I guess in a nutshell, what you are saying is that prevention is better than cure, right?
Yes.
Take the effort now, spare yourself the pain.
Not just prevention, mitigation is better than
mitigation
cure.
then.
Yes.
Okay. And as Raju mentioned, we will have a panel discussion that will start shortly. But two things are going to happen first. We are going to take a short bio break. Okay, so go off and do what you want. We will resume in 8 minutes time. Okay, according to my clock, it's 5:37. We will resume at 5:45. Okay, and in the meantime, if you come back early, I'm going to share with you the results of the poll that we took earlier. Okay, so at 5:45, we will return for the panel. And in the meantime, do join me in thanking the speakers as well as the Q&A, the people who spoke on the Q&A for their contribution here. So thank you.